What's up, everyone? Hey, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to join us. Got a lot of lease option questions today. So if you like lease options, we have several to go over. So, Bo, what is that background that you have?
Well, I'm actually out of town, everybody. This is how much I enjoy doing this. I'm out of town. I'm actually in a condo right now. And there was this beautiful mural picture of like a duck and some weeds. So I kind of took it down just so you didn't have that.
Hey, so we just got in the mail. I'm going to show everyone. It might be kind of hard here, but you got to check this out. So the Folds of Honor DVD. So we get DVDs. Of course, who watches a DVD? But it's a great marketing tool for us. But inside, you get a special code, and you can watch the high def online as well. But I think we're going to give some of these away. It's got a cool little sleeve here. Um, you can kind of see the if you haven't checked out the Folds of Honor, definitely you can check that out on Amazon Prime. I think we're going to be giving some of these away here in the next couple weeks. We have some exciting news to share with you guys, but I say we just get started and we'll kind of share some of that news as we go on because someone's got the question. So
That's
um,
right.
I'm ready. So
Let's just jump in then. All right. So
let's do
our
it.
first question's coming from, I believe I would pronounce this Carrig. What is the best way to market for lease option tenant buyers?
Yeah, so I'm gonna give you three ways, and there's no specific order here. It's just I like all three. So the very first way, if you could put a yard sign with flyers, definitely do that. I couldn't tell you, you get foot traffic too. So people usually, hey, I want to go check out this neighborhood because I really like this neighborhood. Let's just drive around. And a lot of people do that. And if your sign's out there, they're going to pick up a flyer. So that's one. Obviously, the big names, Zillow, Craigslist, um, Zillow does very well. If you can put it on Zillow, do that. And then I would say even more important, especially for people that are local, is the local Facebook groups. Um, the house I'm sitting in right now was found by submitting on a Facebook group in the area that I wanted to live. So definitely search for those local Facebook groups. They're out there. And that's going to be a great place to market for lease option buyers. Now, assuming you have a buy or a property already in hand, that's obviously what's going to make it easier to do that. Some of these are not going to work if you're just marketing generally. So just keep that in mind.
All right. Next question from Susan. Will you guys be analyzing any more deals? Thanks. Chris, they
No,
really liked that
no,
deal
just kidding.
analysis we did.
We got tremendous feedback from you guys that were on our last one. Thank you guys so much for sending in the feedback because it does help us help you. And we are scheduling that as we speak. It's going to be 2 weeks from today. That's what we're going to do. So next week we're not going to do the live Q&A. I'm actually going to be releasing some new videos that I'm going to share with you. There's another question pertaining to it, but we are going to get you that information in the next week or so to get your deals submitted. We will be marketing this to the outside public, but they can't submit questions. Only REIPro subscribers can actually or submit the deal for us to analyze. So we're going to send out all the details here probably next week. So keep that in mind. Hopefully, you guys got a bunch of deals that we can analyze, and we'll do as many as we possibly can. I think the last time we did, I think we went about an hour and 40 minutes on that, Bo. Which
Yeah, but and let's make sure that people are aware because we had a lot of deals, and then we had a lot of people not show up. And the rule was if you don't show up, then we're not
right?
going to analyze the deal for you. And we spent a lot of time going through these deals and looking them up and running comparable sales, and for them not to show up. So if you submit a deal, please do us the courtesy of showing up so we don't waste our time analyzing and then we're not able to, bring it out there to you.
And I know sometimes it's hard for people, they're working or, there's a conflict. But submit the deal, I always say get a babysitter. I don't care what you got to do. Just, show up because, getting the deal done to me is the most important thing. So,
Yep.
all right.
All right. Next one from Gene. How can I master lease options as my strategy and as well as the system for it? Please give me 3 books that I can read besides your training. Thank you for your unfiltered teaching, Gene.
Yeah. So this is kind of hard for me to do because I got to give you a backstory and then I'll tell you how I became aware of it. So when I started studying in 1998, that tells you how old I am. I went through the Carlton Sheets book. Okay, that whole program. Of course, I was totally lost, but he actually covered some of the basics of a rent to own, right? So I really started learning from the contract. That was my teaching aid. We didn't have YouTube videos and all this material that you can find out there to study off of. So as I started to perfect it, get better at it, learn from my mistakes, I didn't need to study it anymore because I already knew how to do it. So I'm not really a good person to ask what other books to read because there are other people that do lease options. You'll probably just have to Google it. I've never just personally have read any books on the subject outside of the Carlton Sheets, which there wasn't much information at all on that subject. So, um, Bo, I don't know if you have actually read any books on this subject matter. You might be. Um,
Well, technically, I was actually a little bit spoiled, actually, because Chris was my personal one-on-one mentor in 2008. Who better to have than him doing it? He taught me how to do it, and I've done numerous lease option deals, and never actually read a book on it because I just learned from you and just started doing it. I think getting in the trenches and doing it, um, that's the best way for me. But of course, I had you to hold my hand through that process.
yeah, sorry, Gene. I'm just not a good person to ask that question, but all right, next.
Coming from Christopher, I'm new and I'm just starting out. What would be the quickest way for me to find a tenant buyer for a lease option that I plan to assign?
So obviously, we need to have the house first. To go back to the 3 ways that I've already explained, from the yard sign to the Zillow, Craigslist, and the local Facebook groups that you can find out there. Those are going to be to me, the fastest ways to do it, especially the online pieces more today. But again, it goes back to that very first question that we had. So hopefully that answered it.
Next question from Samantha. Lost my mouse here. I have my first lease option in the works. My questions are number one, do I take my signed contract to a title company or an attorney? What should I ask to vet a competent title company or attorney? And number two, if I sublease the deal to an end buyer, how does closing work? Your video states it will either be an assignment or a double close, but if I do a double close, will I have to pay a capital gains tax?
Yeah, so several questions here. So let me just
Yeah.
set it up from the beginning. Um, Number one, if you're just putting the house under contract with either the seller and the new buyer, you don't have to take the contracts to a title company or attorney until the buyer exercises their option to buy, which is going to be in the future. So I just want to make that clear that this is where you hear the term, we're just doing, at the kitchen table, because that's literally what we're doing. So until the buyer exercises their option, we're not sending the contracts to anybody at this point. I do prefer real estate attorneys. How do you get the right one? I think you simply ask, have you ever worked this strategy before, the agreements or this type of closing before? I think it's just as simple as asking, have they ever done this before? Um, let's see. As far as the double close, let's talk about that. So, because somebody else actually has this question later on. So you have your new buyer in the property. They fix their credit, whatever they're doing to get qualified. So they're going to their bank. They're going through the qualification process. When that happens, then I'm going to take the agreement that I have with the seller, the agreement I have with the buyer, and I'm going to send that to my closing attorney. It could be a title company as well. And they're going to start the closing process. Okay. Now, if you're just assigning it, you wouldn't be at the closing. You would just assign it over. But the double closing is literally two closings. I'm literally going to walk into the room and close with the seller as the buyer. And I know this sounds crazy. 5 minutes later, I'm going to go into another closing where I'm the seller, even though I haven't really owned it. I technically own it on paper for 5 minutes and then sell it to the new buyer. Now, it's not officially closed yet, right? So, and this rarely happens within 5 minutes. I could technically sign with the seller early in the morning, sign with the buyer later in the afternoon. This could happen in different days. The official close won't happen until all the paperwork is signed appropriately with me and the seller. All the paperwork is signed appropriately with me and the buyer, and the money has been wired to the attorney's office or the title company. Once that takes place, now it is officially closed. And that's what we call a double closing. And that's kind of very simple, short answer of what a double closing is, but just think of it that way. Now, as far as the capital gains, you have to pay taxes on any money you receive, no matter what part of the process that you're in. So if I collect down payment money, technically that's income. If I make money off the sale of the property, the difference in purchase price, then I'm going to have to pay taxes on that. Again, this is why we really have, we always talk about having an LLC in place, because this is going to help you to expense some of that income. You're going to have to buy stuff for your office and your vehicle and different things, your computer and so forth. That's going to help offset some of those profits that you're going to make in a lease option. So, did I get all of them?
I think you
I think
did.
that was it. But
Mm.
hopefully that helped. But yeah, and again, um, double closing is going to happen with wholesaling too. It's not just lease options. So just keep that in mind. Okay.
All right. Next question from Zaire, I believe. Um, will it be a training series on rehabbing, fix and flip like there is for wholesaling, pre foreclosures, and lease options in REIPro?
So the answer is yes. I did a 3-part series on wholesaling a couple years ago, I think it was. It seems like it's been a while. I'm actually revising the entire wholesale series, and that's what we're going to be. We're going to start launching some of the episodes next week on wholesaling. So after I do wholesaling, then we're going to do the fix and flip. We have 3 awesome properties that Bo and I flipped. It's great to use our properties because I've got all the pictures, I've got all the numbers, I got all the problems, and they were definitely problems. How did we market it? I'm going to walk through how do we fund it? How do we go through that whole buying and selling process? So that series is going to be coming after the wholesaling series that I'm going to redo. So good.
All right. Next question from Andrea. So, when looking at comps, how do you get the right comp and ARV when there are no recent properties that have sold that have been rehabbed? For example, subject property is 3237 Atkins Drive in Macon, Georgia. There is a recent comp of $60,000, but based on the photos, it's not been rehabbed. So, how do I get the correct ARV for the subject property? Great question, Andrea. And, sometimes it can be challenging. Now, typically what I do is I use a variety of resources. I look at the REI Pro value. I'm looking at the Zillow's estimate, even though it is just a estimate, just like REI Pro is an automated value as well. I also look at the comps, like you're saying. I ran the comps, and I try to take into consideration all of this stuff. If it gets really, really challenging, one of the things I would say would be a great thing for you to do is get with a realtor local in your area. They may have some more insight that if you do X, Y, and Z during the rehab to this property, what could you expect to sell it for? Now, you could always get an appraisal done, but that's the most expensive route to go, especially if you're just trying to determine if this is a deal. Now, I would say that I quickly looked at the property, looked at the comps in the area that you're talking about, and it looks to me like the properties are kind of selling really low, 15, 20, 25,000. You will see that 60,000 when, and you said it wasn't even rehab. First of all, in that price range, you're going to have a hard time financing the property. Not many banks are going to touch this. So I'm really thinking that probably what you've got here, a lot of investors coming in, they're probably paying cash and they're doing buy and hold situations, rentals. They could be fixing up some and doing some seller finances, things like that. But either way, I think I'd get with a realtor in your area, probably one of the better options for you to try to determine if I buy it, rehab it, what could I sell it for?
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe we should warn people right now that I know we did this for the deal analysis night. If you don't want the public to see the address, um, maybe change the question up and leave the address out. But just keep in mind when we do these publicly, obviously for REI Pro users, but just keep that in mind.
Okay, next question from Todd. I have studied your lease option videos several times and I'm ready to start marketing for properties. Thanks for the great training. Should I market primarily in major markets with large populations and avoid smaller markets? In my area, a large market will be population 200,000 to 500,000. Smaller markets could be well under 200,000. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you a couple of answers on this. My first response is I always invest in my backyard. So if that's a big market, it's a big market. If it's a small market, it's a small market. I just know that it's convenient. Um, to look at a larger market in comparison to a smaller market, if I had to pick one, I would pick the smaller market. Just why, right? So the simple reason is less competition. So you get in these larger markets, the seller's getting bombarded more, things of that nature. So I like to be in a niche market. So when I started, a lot of you that have been following me for years, I started in a town of 100,000 people, and it was a college town on top of that. So a lot of these people were students, and when you have a small college town, you also have competition, and we were doing 5 to 7 deals a month just because of what we were doing. When we look at this creative financing strategy, lease options, there's not that many people that know how to do this. There's a lot of people that can read a definition or Google what it is, but to physically get out there and do it, there's not that many investors that know how to connect all the dots. And I think that's the big message. So if I had to pick, I would pick a smaller market, but like I said, I always start in your backyard. If your backyard's a big market, start there. I think it's just a matter of finding, these situations, these properties, and they're everywhere. It's just, but if I had to pick, there's my answer. So
Well, and coming from one of our users on tonight named Buck, he just might want to make a comment and he put in all caps that he's been killing it and he's in a town of 40,000 people.
yeah, so I can tell you a lot of my wholesale deals were like in towns of like 5,000 people. It's amazing how many those types of properties you're going to find in a very small area. There's not many people there, and we could say all day, well, if there's not that many people that live there, are you going to be able to sell it? Well, think about this. Somebody used to live in the house, and for whatever reason they're not. At some point, someone will eventually live in that house again. And so I've done numerous wholesale deals in these very small towns. They were so small. When I went, I had to go down to the tax assessor to look up a lot of this information back in the day. They had the microfiche. I mean, that's how small some of these towns were. So, um, but yeah, small market. Good.
Next question from Bernard. Wholesale, seller finance, or lease option. A guy owns 15 single family residences in southwest of metro Atlanta with a rent roll of probably $800 to $1,100 per property monthly. He wants 1.5 million minimum. The rehabs only support about 1.25 million max. I haven't discussed term payments as of yet. He is interested in getting out of the landlording business, but has had tenants that have been paying him for years faithfully. The area is one that can justify a little higher rent.
Yeah. So the very first thing when I looked at this particular question, the and pay attention to this, that this is for everybody, is I'm not going to overpay for something no matter what strategy I use. So like I can't go and say, hey, I'm gonna because they're seller financing it to me, I can pay them more. This is actually a perfect setup for a seller finance. Because if I could go to the owner and say, hey, I can pay you 1.25 million, but this is how I'm going to do it. If you look this over the course of 3, 5 years, again, you'd have to set the terms. They would end up making 1.5 or more just through the financing piece to it. So the interest that they're going to make, that might be a better solution. There's so many investors that are in this situation right here. That's a perfect setup for a seller finance. You go in and you just buy. And here's another thing to also think about because I've done this numerous times. The investor that owns these properties, they may say, hey, I'll do seller financing on these three, right? But I really want to get rid of these four over here this way. So it's not always that, hey, they're going to sell all 15 at one shot. I did buy 18 at one shot. There's one deal that I did, Bo, that I've never done another deal like this.
Which
I
one?
I got, you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
3 houses, 3 vacant lots, 12 duplexes, and an apartment complex on one contract. I put all that under contract. I didn't have a freaking clue what I was doing at the time. I was nervous, like, oh my God. But what I found out is that, and I've had a lot of my students that go through this one scenario right here, is they won't do all 15 this way, but they may do 3 or 4 this way. So I think you need to look at it from that point of view. And I would also bring that up to it because this sets up perfect for a seller finance.
Absolutely. All right. Question from Sherry. I want to buy this property to live in and run a business. I can't find comps and I'm not sure what amount to offer the owner. She is asking 150,000. What do you suggest? And then she gives an address 17030 Jefferson Davis Highway, Chesterfield, Virginia.
Yeah. So um, I'm assuming that it's zoned commercial, this particular property, just based on that area and so forth. So comps are going to already be difficult. And this is a good tip for everybody. Typically, commercial, I want to try to keep this very general. Typically, commercial is going to be valued at what the income could be produced on that particular property, right? So if you have a small commercial building that does X, Y, and Z, and then you have a big, 3-story glass building that has, generates tons of money, then it's going to be different. So now there will be obviously similarities if they're side by side, but keep in mind it's really what, I always say what business is going to be there and how much income could I generate from the business being there, and then here's what I could afford to pay. So commercial is going to be a little bit different than residential as far as getting comparable sales, and understanding the fact that you want to live in the property at the exact same time. Again, I want to look at my business model and say, hey, how much. One thing that you could do is ask the seller if they would do seller financing on this. Number one, that would be the first thing, because when I looked this particular property up, they were asking 133,000 a couple of years ago, I believe, on this property. So if they were willing to take that, and I believe it was listed with a realtor, so there'd be a commission involved on that. Um, and I'm not sure if this one is actually listed or not. I can't remember, but if they were willing to take 133 a couple years ago, maybe they're willing to take a discount right now. But you need to look at what your business can afford based on the income that's coming in, because again, it's going to be difficult to get an exact comp on this particular property.
All right. Coming from Sunny Law, how do you do a closing with a lease option buyer at the end of the term? Basically, what's the process?
Yeah, and we went through the double close already, so I'm just going to refer back to the answer I've already given in the previous question. You good?
Sorry, it helps to unmute yourself. After doing a lease option, when is the first payment due on the house?
So the first payment is due on the commencement date. So technically, I could sign the contract with the seller today, but the commencement date may not be till 30, 45, 60 days from now. So whenever the commencement date is when that first payment is due.
All right. Next question from Jhari. When you make an offer, can you base the sales price off of the last price sold, or do you have to go off of the ARV? All right, Jhari said, no, you really can't base your offer now on the last sales price of that subject property, not what it's sold for. What you want to do is you want to run the comps inside of REIPro and look at the recently sold comparable sales of that subject property, most like kind property. Now, this is going to give you the ARV, or what we call the after repaired value for that property. And then I would say, depending on your offer, whether it's going to be an all cash, lease option, seller finance, go into step 4 and then use the formulas on that all cash offer worksheet, because you got to deal with rehab costs, holding costs, and so on. That's going to get you down to what that offer price is going to need to be. But you can't go off of what it sold for the last time that it sold, because that could be way off.
Yeah, everything's based on the ARV, by the way.
Absolutely. Sherry wants to know, how can I buy in Arizona if I live in Virginia? How do I get a closing attorney? And then she puts a property address here. Well, I can tell you personally, Sherry, I prefer to buy where I live. I have made a big mistake early on in my investing career. I did purchase something sight unseen, and I can just tell you, man, that was a big mistake. That's how I actually met Chris, and he helped me work through that mistake many years later. And that part's been wonderful. So, but I would at least caution you, if you want to do that, have a partner or somebody in the area that can at least physically go look at the property for you, take some pictures, do the walkthroughs, help you make an intelligent decision when it comes to making these offers. And as far as closing attorneys, title companies, you can contact any of them in the area that can handle the closings, and they can do the remote closing like Chris was talking about earlier. You just sign some paperwork there in Virginia, you overnight it back to the attorney or the title company, and they can close the transaction. Just from a personal experience, I like to buy where I live. I don't like doing it outside of that, but I do know people who buy properties all the time in places that they don't live. They've never stepped foot in these houses. I think you're kind of the same mindset, aren't you, Chris? Buy where you are.
Yeah, well, a lot of people do this, invest in other areas. Um, Me personally, I'm on the same page. That's the one thing I want to touch it. I want to feel it. I don't want to just throw. Now, a lot of people, you just throw numbers out, and if the seller grabs, then you go have somebody go look at it. You could do that, but it does make it a little more challenging. And I think depending on the strategy. I mean, one of my students lived in Los Angeles, and he seller financed every single house that he did in Tampa, Florida. So, but he did have somebody there that could physically look at it, take pictures, and then my student would actually communicate over the phone with the owner and negotiate the deal and do it that way. So, um, obviously you could do it. It just does make it more challenging. I would have somebody there, like you said.
Yeah. Okay, Jonathan. Hi, guys. 2129 Browns Chapel Road, Boone, North Carolina. Have a sixplex, would like analyzed. It's zoned commercial. The seller said it can be zoned residential. Could turn the sixplex into a duplex and zone to residential. We're waiting for the contract to be signed at 120,000 with the seller. The seller says it's worth 300 to 400,000 when finished properly. He put 50,000 into the units, but it has sat vacant for several years. The repairs are 50 to 100,000. Have not been inside as of August the 4th. What do you think we could sell for with the limited information I have at this second? Thanks.
Yeah, it is limited. I did write some notes down on this particular deal here. So again, this is the value is really going to be worth, what the income that's going to be generated off that property. So just keep that in mind. So one tip here to really try to figure out what is that ARV? What could I potentially sell this for? I would actually, and I want this to be confusing. So again, we're going to record this and people can go back, but I would go into Deal Pro and I would select purchase and then rent. And I get that we're trying to figure out what it could sell for. And once you fill that out, then go back and change the ARV to like, what that purchase price would be for a buyer, because they're going to be running the numbers to make sure financially it would make sense for them based on the actual income that's coming in. So that's one way to do it. Another way you could do is the gross rent multiplier, where you divide the sales price, and the sales price is actually going to be the ARV of what your new buyer is going to be buying it for by the annual rental income. But just a quick note here I wrote down. You really need to find out what the rental rate would be for 6 units versus a duplex, because obviously you want the income to be at its highest in order to get that ARV at its highest. So I would need to, know all the information. But again, this could be, a great deal to analyze more in depth with some more information on our deal analysis night. But that would be just a couple of quick ways that you could determine what potentially the ARV would be at the end of the day.
Okay, question from Gene. Thanks, guys, for teaching good stuff. Please help me understand the process of buying listings or lists and uploading it to REIPro. And if I save some leads, how do I bring them to postcards? Thanks, Gene. Okay, Gene. Thanks for the question. All right, you can use REIPro sources to create marketing campaigns for lead sources, but as you stated, can you buy a list and bring them into REIPro? Absolutely. And I thought that I would actually just show you how to do that. That might be the easiest way to do it just by example. So let me switch screens here. Okay, let me minimize Chris. All right, so up here in marketing, if we go to marketing, what we're going to want to do is build a campaign and import a list into it. Again, you can use REIPro for those of you that might be new on the call tonight. You can use REIPro and go generate the same list with any one of our lead sources that we have here. But if you have a list that you've purchased, let's say that's a list of divorces. We don't have a lead source nationwide for divorces. We go to marketing, and then there's a button here for import leads. All you have to do is click on this button. You can create a new campaign. I'm just going to select one. Select your file that you purchased. And I kind of downloaded one just as a quick example here. And it's going to show you a list of maybe the top 20 properties or so. It's not the whole thing, just so you can see your columns in the list that you bought. And what you want to do is map your fields to our fields. So it'd be street number, street name or street address, address line to city, state, and zip, and so on. So you just go through and you map all these fields, and then you click import. Now, when you do that, that campaign that you just created now will import your leads into it. And then the second part of your question was, okay, once I have these leads in a campaign, how do I order postcards? So let's just assume we want to order this cash buyer's test. It's got 9 postcards in it. Over here on the actions button, click it. The very first option says order postcards. From there, you just walk through each screen one at a time, selecting your postcard, um, workflow, your contact information, as far as any kind of return address, and so on. And then once you finish this 7-step process here, you will have ordered postcards through us. So I believe that answers the question of how do I import and order postcards. Let me switch back.
You could totally tell like you're the programmer because every campaign says test, testing,
Yeah, totally.
TESPO, test.
Hey, at least we're testing, right? All right. Let's see. Next question from Jared. Have you guys thought about implementing a way to skip trace trusts and LLCs? Or is there already a way to do this with your software? Also, is there a possibility of a Driving for Dollars app in the future that is linked with the software? And as a bonus question, what's your best acquisition and disposition pitch for lease options? Thanks, fellas. Y'all are awesome and love to see y'all come down here in Southwest Florida and do a seminar or mastermind sometime. Well, I can tell you from the skip trace point of view, this is my 2 cents. I'll tell you how I do it. If it's a trust or an LLC, a lot of times the trust will have the family name in it. So it might be Manry Trust and whatever. I'll take that property and I'll use the family name portion of the trust. I'll use that tax bill where they're receiving the tax bill for that address, and I'll start searching from that way. And that's many times I find it. Now, if it's an LLC or a company, the system only uses names of individuals with an address. Okay, it doesn't do the LLC or the trust name. So I typically go out to the state corporation's website. Almost every state will have one where you can search for the name of a company. Most of it's public information. There's some that aren't. But I generally can find who are the officers of the corporation, or if nothing else, the registered agent's name and the address of the registered agent sometimes. And I'll use that information, plug that in step 2, and I'll search on it that way to get that individual officer's name at that address. Let's see what else. That's about the trust and LLCs. Is there a possibility of a Driving for Dollars app? I'm not going to publicly say anything about that. I just know that we have a lot of stuff that we're working on in the background, and there's a lot of things that I think you'll like about what's coming soon.
That was a
That was very
perfect
vague.
question, actually.
And how about this bonus question about your acquisition and disposition pitches for lease option?
I thought I'd actually just show you. This is one of the best, and this again, why we put it in the software. But Bo, if you wouldn't mind, just pull up a property real quick and go to executable step 2. We'll go to the phone scripts. I'm going to show you. This is to me my famous question and I'll sometimes rephrase it in a different way depending how the conversation's going. But this would be this is a good one. So we're going to step 2, which is contacting the owner. We're going to go to the phone scripts and then just click FSBO, and it really doesn't matter, but scroll down. Keep going. Okay, so you're going to see these additional questions right here. So right under the additional questions, if we can agree on a price and accept responsibility for future repairs, would you consider a lease purchase or seller financing? A lot of times when I'm talking to sellers, I'll use the term lease purchase. Generally sounds better to the seller, where a lease option sounds better to a new buyer. At the end of the day, it's the same thing. Or seller financing. So a lot of times I'll reword this and I'll say, would you accept monthly payments short term? It's just a very generally, well, I don't know. What does that mean? And that just kind of opens the conversation up. But That's a good one right there that I would recommend to position yourself into this. And I couldn't tell you so many times where the seller says, "Oh no, 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 I can't take payments," and then I learn about their situation even more. That, hey, I've got a job transfer, I need to sell the property, and my big question a lot of times is, what happens if you can't sell the property? What would you do with it? And it just shocks the sellers every single time I ask that question. And when I want to say plant the seed here, but that's what I do with this question. Even when they say no, I'll come back and put the numbers on paper. I couldn't tell you how many times when we make these multiple offers, the seller comes and they feel that they have to choose one of the offers that I give them. And this question actually sets that up perfectly. And again, depending on the situation of the owner, but I think when you feel that everybody that's selling their property wants to sell it, be done with it, and get rid of the burden, I get that. But the big question is, what would you do with the property if it doesn't sell?
See,
And
that's a
that's
real
a stunner for
that's a
people.
really good question because everybody thinks they're going to sell the house. It may take an extra 30 days. I got it, but they think they're going to sell it. And it never occurred to them, well, what if I don't sell it? No, I can't take payments, but if I don't sell it, I have to do something. They're going to be
Yeah.
forced to rent it. So,
And if they're willing to
all right, let me
rent it and take monthly payments, then that sets up perfect for these two strategies.
exactly.
Yeah. And we would
Okay,
love to do a seminar, by the way.
I'd
Uh,
love to.
I don't know if anybody would actually show up. That's the thing. So, obviously, we're doing a lot online right now. I can't wait to get back on the road and see you guys in person. We love to do them, and hopefully soon we'll be able to.
All right, question from Crystal. Looks like it's a two-part question. Would you see in the quick lookup if the property has any liens? Number two, if there are multiple loans on the property, would you see that in quick lookup? All right, so Crystal, in quick lookup or in step one, the property details section, what you're going to see is the historical sales transaction and mortgage data such as first and second liens, as well as home equity lines of credit. You're not going to see mechanics liens or other types of liens. I thought I'd show you. Let me share my screen because I thought I would show you something. Only because I know this is actually one of my properties. Get rid of this. Okay, so if I pull this property up, just like any property here, um, here's the historical stuff that I'm talking about. But if we go to the mortgage info, the reason I wanted to show you this one is because you got these builder construction loans. You can see if you have a first and a second, it's going to show up like this, where you have a conventional loan, maybe a line of credit. You're going to see later all these refinances that are happening, what type of financing on, but what you're not going to see is whether or not there's some type of mechanics lien or tax liens and things of that nature. But I want to show you how lines of credit and first and second mortgages would actually appear on there. All right. Let
Everybody
me,
should send Bo a postcard on that property if he wants to
oh,
sell.
don't worry. I'll just sit there and filter through them the same way that I do already.
Did you do a lease option on that?
Yeah, that one actually, yeah, I've had a lease option tenant in there and thought about doing a seller finance, but actually I think she's gonna buy it next year. She's been a long-term lease option of mine. She has paid the rent every single month, I believe, for 7 straight years on that. Okay. And then it says questions. Thanks for joining us. I guess that was our last question. So let's take I know we
There was, hey Bo, real quick, there was actually a few more questions. There was a couple of people that submitted multiple questions. I narrowed them down to two, just so we could get everybody's in. And I knew we were going to do some questions after the fact as well. So I just want to A couple of people had 4 or 5 questions. I just narrowed the first two that they asked. Maybe they can ask those questions on another one. So we are ready to take any kind of questions that you guys have.
All
Um,
right. I've got them here, and I'm going to have to filter a little bit through the chat window versus the question answer panel. So, um, first, mentoring.
if you asked a question, I surely did not hear it.
Do you do any mentoring?
Oh, you're going in
That-
and out. I don't know if it's me or you or
it's
whatever.
probably my internet connection at this condo. Sorry.
I don't really think it. I think you're at a log cabin or something. Actually, looking at the picture, but we do. We haven't really publicly, just out there and tell people about it. If you're interested in any kind of personal coaching, I only do personal coaching, and what that means is I work with you exclusively. I don't do group coaching in a way where you got 500 people on one call. Um, it's personal coaching. You have my personal cell phone, you have my personal email address, and we set game plans. We go through the whole thing. I've been doing it for years. And if you are interested in learning more about that, we do offer a couple of different programs for coaching. You can email us, Bo. Maybe you could just can you type the our email out for that? That way, everybody will have it, um, and they won't have to come back and listen to what I said. So,
Yep, I
my
just put it in the chat window for everybody.
yeah, so it's coaching at myreipro.com. And we will personally receive those messages just so everybody knows it does not go to somebody that works for us. We will personally respond to you. We'll give you the bullet points of each program. Obviously, Bo was one of my students. Now we're business partners. It does make a huge difference for the people that can commit to it. And so worked with a lot of people, and I love it. So, but I can
All
only
right.
take so many people. This is not open for a ton of people to be in, anyways. So
Yep.
it's very
Very
rare
time
that,
consuming.
huh?
Very time consuming.
Yeah. So I always tell people it's the least profitable, most time consuming business we do, but I just love doing it. I love helping other people because it's questions like this that happen up all the time, right? And sometimes it's a quick question, easy question that you just need to email. Sometimes we just need to talk about it. Sometimes we need to go through these offers. I need to tell you how to, present. I mean, just literally holding your hand through the entire process. And we have a great team of people that also will help you out as well. It's not just me and you. We have copywriters, we have marketing people. Bo is going to be in that particular program. You're getting a really awesome team beside you. And I always tell people, if you have the experience that we have combined in everything that we do by your side, why wouldn't you do it? I mean, but obviously, there is a cost to it. And but if you want information, just shoot us an email. I'll be happy to send you some bullet points of the program. If it's something that you're interested in, I will actually schedule a personal phone call with you, and we will take it from there.
All right. Next question from eBay. Hi, Chris and Bo. My name is eBay. You guys are great. I like lease options, but it is difficult in Texas because of the state law. How then can someone in Texas do lease options? Do you know of people doing lease options in Texas, and is it doable in Texas?
I do know people doing it. I do know the workaround, but publicly, you should just do seller financing. Um, that strategy in itself is already going to be more profitable in Texas. It's a very common strategy in Texas. So I would stick more with the seller financing. I hate to teach people publicly a workaround in one state on a lease option. And the reason why I know it so well is because a lot of my attorneys are in Texas and a ton of my deals were in Texas. So I know Texas pretty well, and I know the law that you're talking about. Um, but I would stick with seller financing.
All right. Next question is I am looking into selling my current home by way of owner finance, but I currently have a mortgage for 27 more years. Would it be possible to have a title company escrow my mortgage so my mortgagor does not request money owed?
Well, I don't normally tell you to do this. So if you're worried about that, I would just do a contract for deed, where the deed is not actually given to the buyer. And I only say that if you own the property. So, like, I would never do this if I were the buyer, because I know what I'm doing. I don't need to do it that way. But a contract for deed would be the way around. If you're worried about the mortgage lender, calling the loan due once the deed is transferred. So that's a kind of a quick and easy way of doing it.
Question from Laura. For a single family residence turned into a duplex, selling for 73,000, you can rent each side for 575. Which way would you suggest I'm buying the property? ARV is 90,000. The area has a lot of duplexes. The new rent can go up to 730 per month per Zillow. The home just needs some basic cleaning and minor rehabbing before getting new renters. It's currently vacant.
I'd have to actually look at the deal, but be cautious on one thing that I heard, and that is it could rent for. I couldn't tell you. I've seen so many landlords tell me, well, it could rent for this much more. And I'm like, well, why aren't you doing it? So be cautious with how much it could rent for. If it's kind of normal that it goes for 575 and people are used to 575, or what improvements do I have to do to the property to get a higher rent? And then is that going to be worth it? So, I always tell people, people would spend $50,000 to get $200 a month positive cash flow. I'm like, well, how many years would that take to actually get the 50 grand back? Like, that would just almost sounds nonsense. So look at how much you're spending versus how much income's coming in, and how much more would I have to spend in order to get that higher rent. So you'd have to analyze the deal. Deal Pro would be great to go through, to analyze that one.
All right. Coming from Lee, Leah, would you recommend using a property management company to manage your tenant buyers? Now, if you're talking about a lease option, I've never used a property manager for that. I've got some buy holds that I have some rentals and some duplexes that are in areas that I'm not really wanting to go myself. I have ones out of state. Yes, I use property managers for those, and I let them just deal with all the tenants and the toilets and the headaches that I've got on that side. Lease option buyers, no, I manage those myself.
Yeah, I would do it yourself.
um, Sammy wants to know, hi guys, what is an average percentage cash offer of the ARV?
Oh, you can't ever.
I figured you'd have a heyday with that one, Chris.
You hear it a lot.
Hmm.
Um, People develop these. Well, I'll only spend X percentage of the ARV. So think about this: if you have $100,000 property, and somebody goes, "Well, I'm only going to pay X percentage of the ARV." Well, that's, let's say, 65%. Well, that's 65 grand. But what happens if the home needs 50,000 in repairs? Then you would overpaid for the property. So everybody has to go through step 4, that cash offer formula, because a lot of times you can't just, there's not one deal that is an exact number. Like, it's like 65%. A lot of times it comes out to 44%, depending on the amount of repairs in the house. So you really do have to go through the calculations. There's never ever a time over 500 deals that I've ever gone into a deal and said, I'll pay X percent. And that's not beating, whose question was this?
Are you there? Okay, there was a big, huge pause there for a minute.
Oh, okay.
Didn't know if it
Um,
was you or me. Oh no,
no,
it just my connection is unstable. Okay, we'll work through it.
I was just saying, who asked the question? What was their name? Do you
I'm trying to
remember?
remember. I'm trying to even remember the question
So
here at this point.
here's my point. Not beating you up personally. It's so many people have gone on thinking that you take X percentage minus this, divide by two, and magically you're going to have this number. Now, there's some inexperienced investors that do this all the time. All I'm saying is you have to go through the formula every single time on every single property. That is
Yeah,
the one thing I don't mess with, and that's the numbers. Like,
yeah,
I need to feel confident that this number's right, not some magical formula of percentages.
yeah. We have another user on right now, Jonathan, saying that the 70% rule is tough. He's actually lost several deals with this whole 70% rule.
Yeah, and if you do it, here's what you're gonna find. You're gonna put the house under contract because the seller's like, "Oh, okay," and then you're never gonna find a buyer for it.
Hmm.
And that's because you've overpaid for it to begin with. So, unless you're in a good market, you could pay a little bit more, but you would know that being in the market as the investor. But you have to go through the formula every single time. Um, Not to beat this to death here, but I just
It's
hear it
really, but it's
so
really, really
much.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a good question, I think, um, from a legal perspective. But Buck wants to know. He's got a wholesale deal a few weeks ago. He found a buyer. He's assigned his contract. Now the seller is saying that maybe they don't want to follow through at the agreed upon price, and he wants to know what his options are moving forward.
Well, that's pretty simple, actually.
Yeah.
So the great thing about real estate, so everyone knows, the seller has to sell, but the buyer doesn't have to buy legally. Like the buyer would lose earnest money or deposits. They could potentially lose that, but they don't go to jail or get sued because you don't buy the house. It's different with the seller. If the seller refuses to sell, once it's under contract, that would be breach of contract, and you could actually sue the seller. Now, to get to that extent, now we got to go get an attorney and the cost of doing that. A lot of people probably wouldn't do that. But you tell the seller, look, we have signed a contract to buy. One thing that I would make sure that you do is to fill out that affidavit in step 6, the executable steps, and go file that down at the county recorder's office in case they go around your back and try to sell it to somebody else. Okay, so but legally they have to sell this property, and it does put you in an uncomfortable situation that you got to go back to the seller and say, look, we have a signed agreement at this price. I'm sorry, and we're closing on this property. One way or the other, if you don't sign, unfortunately, it would be breach of contract, which I don't want to sue over this, but I do have the legal right to do it. You hate to have that conversation with the seller because it's just an awkward situation.
Hmm.
And then also, I would evaluate, is it worth it to continue? How much more are they really wanting? Can you make it work where everyone is still happy? Or are they just wanting some ridiculous number? They just don't want to sell. They don't like you, whatever it may be. Is it something like that?
And Buck, I see later on down in the Q&A's, Buck said he did file the affidavit, so thanks. Um, Not really sure who this one's from. Just said previously before the use of credits, when I did a skip trace, it doesn't save the information to the property. Is that normal behavior or a bug? Thanks. I'm not really sure actually what the question there is, whether it was using credits before or after. If you do in step 2, you run a skip trace report, it will save it to the property. And anytime you come back into that property, you'll see it right below the previous report that you ran. If you are getting some other behavior, look, we got a great customer support team. Reach out to them, let them try to walk through and figure out what might be going on. Jhari wants to know what's the difference between a quit claim, a trust deed, and a grant deed.
See, this is the time to ask that because that was one of the questions, right? So let's talk about the quit claim deed. So usually when you buy a home, you get a deed. It could be special warranty deed, which would be very common. And basically, there's insurance on that, right? So there's been research on that. It's good. There's no hidden relative down the road that's going to cause come back on you, something like that. Where a quick claim deed is usually that's given to, like, if I just wanted to give like my son a property, like I already know it's good, there's no issues with it. I could just do a quick claim deed, which is very quick, dirty. We do it for $10 and there it is. So usually those are going to be used if you're selling or giving the property to a family member, or a lot of companies will go back and forth of through the LLC back to me, then back to the LLC, depending on how they're borrowing money and all this
I
stuff that you could do.
was about to say that example.
We're not going to get into that, but so basically a quick claim deed, there is no insurance guarantee whatsoever that um, on the deed itself. So let's probably keep that simple.
Yeah, and I believe Ellie's asking the next question. It's a very elaborate question. Um, I think it's all about creating multiple offers to sellers and the deal pro. I think that would be one good to maybe ask in the upcoming deal analysis session. It'd be too
Yeah.
long, I think, to deal with that night. So Elliot, look for that and ask it over there if you don't mind. Brooke, in a lease purchase, if a tenant buyer stops paying, do you need to go through an eviction or a foreclosure to remove them? Brooke, I'd
So,
say, if it's a lease purchase, then the tenant buyer that's in there doesn't actually own the property yet or anything. So they're just renting or leasing from you. It's going to be more of an eviction process, not a foreclosure process. Not meaning to cut you off there, Chris.
no, I was going to say the same thing. So an eviction is when someone's renting, and a foreclosure when someone has the deed. So lease options are always evictions. Seller financing is always foreclosure.
Ah, um, Anonymous, I'm not sure who the name is. I sometimes get confused when trying to calculate an offer when sellers insist on interest with seller financing. Do you have any tips on how I can get better at this?
You mean the interest amount? Is that what I heard?
Yes, so it gets confused when he's trying to calculate the offer price doing a seller finance because the seller wants interest. I'd say go into step 4 seller
Yeah.
finance and just plug the numbers in.
Yeah, just start the interest low. And
Yeah.
here's a great tip. Actually, I teach my coaching students this, is when I calculate a seller finance deal, I always try to get the monthly payment close or right around what would it rent for, number one, and then I'm going to go a little bit less than that, and I'm going to either adjust the purchase price or the interest rate to get it close to just underneath that rental value. Now, this will be different depending on the price of the home, but it's a general rule of thumb. So I might have to, start with a low percentage. Always start with 3%. See what they say. I think a lot of it comes down to the mortgage payment. What actually is the total payment that they're going to receive is what they would, be more interested in. To do a 0% interest is like slim to none. I mean, that would be extremely rare that a seller would do 0% interest. So you only have to expect that there's going to be interest on it. Now, what we don't want to do is, offer the seller like 8% interest, and it's going to throw our payment too high. And then next thing that could ruin the deal, unless it's like a $50,000 house where maybe the rents are good there. So maybe you could sell or finance it, even though you're paying a higher interest, because you're going to get X amount of rent over here. So you do have to play with it to make it a win-win, obviously.
Okay, this is an interesting one. We'll see if this is something we can wrap our head around. Coming from Joanna. She said, how would you tackle an ARV and an offer price on a very unique property? The owner, who I know, calls it a quote mystery house. The main house is pieced together. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom downstairs, a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom upstairs. but there's also a separate 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom unit behind that's currently being rented. The property lines of the foundation are questionable. I would be renovating while living in the main house. I would rent the rear unit, and then I would use the upstairs for a long-term or Airbnb space. I think her question is, how in the world would you come up with an ARV on a property with all that going on?
Well, I would see what other homes in the area have sold for, just because there's an additional room that's being rented. It sounds like it may be falling apart. It sounds like there may not have been a permit pulled for the addition onto the property. You said the foundation was not very good. I would probably question that. Um, Obviously, be a cheap deal for you to get, but without seeing really, exactly what we're talking about. Something like that, it's like I need to see like pictures of the property. Like, what are we really talking about here?
Yeah,
What are we getting ourselves into, or should we walk away?
exactly. So, sometimes the right way to buy a house is actually to walk away from it and not buy it. Sometimes
Yeah,
that is your best option. Philip wants to know what's the difference from a lease purchase and a lease option.
exact same thing.
Yep.
I have had numerous people tell me that, oh, in one, the down payment's non-refundable, but the other is not. Over. I had a realtor one time say, no, if you do a lease purchase, you have to buy it. I'm like, well, what happens if I don't? Well, no, you have to. What happens if I don't? No, you have to. It's like they don't even know. There's no difference, because no matter what we call it, it's still, you could call it a rent to own as well. We'll throw in a third name. It's always a non-refundable option payment, technically, is what it's called. And we're going to apply that to the purchase price. So it's just terminology for people. I think there's some people on YouTube that like to say, oh, no, this is different. And no, it's not. It's all the same freaking thing. And here's the thing, there's really no definition in the dictionary for it, right? So it's kind of how we execute it and so forth. So to me, it's the exact same thing. Like I said before, I like to use the terminology lease purchase to the seller and use the lease option terminology for the new buyer. So just sounds better to the seller. It sounds better to the new buyer.
Last question, unless somebody types in another one from Anonymous, which I believe is the same person that was asking about the seller finance and getting calculated, getting, the interest question. I want to know
Mhm.
what formula again. Well, number one, that's a seller finance, or it's a formula when you're amortizing loans, when you have an amount, an interest rate, and a payment, principal plus interest. I can't really just give you the formula off the top of my head. Now, if you go to step 4 or the tools section of REIPro, we actually have a mortgage calculator there that's what that's doing. So you wouldn't necessarily have to know the formula. Just plug in, the purchase price, the interest rate, and it's going to calculate those payments and interest, principal and interest payments for you.
I can give you kind of a general formula for all the strategies, actually, all combined, which will answer this question. When I make multiple offers, my cash offer on the sales price, right, is always going to be the lowest. The next highest based on sales price is going to be a seller finance offer. And then the highest sales price offer is always going to be a lease option. So now I've got the seller from a sales price point of view. Okay, do I want to just be done with this, get cashed out, but take a lower dollar amount, or make a little bit more and get interest, or do I need to receive top dollar for this property? So that's based on sales price. The down payment on a seller finance is always going to be more than a lease option, which is more of an option payment. It's like a glorified, security deposit, more or less. It's going to be more than a lease option. The monthly payment, the with a lease option, what I like to do is take what is the normal monthly going rate, rental rate, and then at minimum $200 less than that. Now, if you can get more, get more. A seller finance, that monthly payment is solely determined on the sales price and the interest rate. So if I need to adjust the monthly payment on a seller finance, I have to adjust one of those two numbers to make it work. So there's some general formulas on that.
So eBay wants to know, can you throw a little bit more light on how the seller financed and the lease option with regard to Texas. How can the seller finance be used in place of a lease option?
Well, it's not in place of it. It's just getting the seller to deed you the property and taking payments in a different way. It's not a lease agreement because I believe in Texas you can only go X amount of months, 90 days or whatever it is, and then that's it. So where a seller finance, you go 30 years with the owner. So you can't take the rent. You can't have a lease agreement executed at the exact same time of a purchase agreement in Texas. If you do that, you have to fall in those, I believe it's 90 days. Okay. So here's what I asked my attorney, and I'll let you guys maybe answer it. So I have an answer, but I said, so let me get this straight, Mr. Attorney. Could I do a lease option for 90 days and then auto extended another 90 days, auto extended another 90 days, another 90 days to give me one full year? And his response was, I just don't think anyone's going to challenge it, but there's not enough cases to say you could or couldn't. So, there's always some way around it, who moved the cheese, I love that whole book, but
eBay said it's actually 180 days, is what she said now.
yeah, so you have to fall within that. But here's the point is, could I just extend it another 180 days? And everyone's going, I don't know, because nobody's testing it right now. And you're going to find people, they're doing it. I just want everybody to know I can't tell you to do it publicly. If you are one of my students and like I'm involved working the deal with you, yeah, I'll probably do the deal because I know you're not going to get in trouble just doing it the right way and disclosing everything up front and how we're going to arrange the contract and stuff like that. But from a public point of view, I don't really want to say it. But
Jhari wants to know, how do you calculate the down payment for a lease option offer?
to the seller as low as possible. But here's what I like to do. And again, this depends on the condition of the property. Because if the home needs some repairs, and again, it has to be livable, meaning that somebody could move in and actually live there. Just because they don't like the color of the paint or it's not updated, it's still people, you could live there. I like to say, okay, if the owner rented the house, what security deposit amount would they receive? And then generally, I like to bring that option payment, down payment, a little bit higher than that and tell the seller, look, this is non-refundable, unlike a security deposit, which would be refundable if they take care of the property or not. We're also going to take care of the maintenance costs and repairs up to $500 per occurrence. So you're not going to get those calls late at night, hey, come fix my toilet, all those crazy things that you're going to get from a tenant. So I want you to just see how I said that. So I say that what I really want to tell them, and then I veer off into something else very quickly. Just that transition into the how you say it a lot of times is going to help. I'm not going to get you to think about if the security deposit on a house, let's say, is $1,500, and I offer you $2,000 non-refundable. That's already better than the $1,500 that they would receive. That is refundable. So I want to word that in a way to keep that as low as possible, because if I can pay the seller $2,000 and I can maybe get 6 or 8 or 10,000 from the new buyer, that's going to be my first profit center. So again, we want to go low with the sellers, low as we can, and then of course the buyers we want to, we got to get that to make sense to where we're going to profit from it. So hopefully that helped.
Yep. One last question from eBay. Can you do a double close on a seller finance deal?
Yeah. You could do a double close on any of the strategies. So you could, but I'm just thinking, why would you? Hold on. You'd have to be doing something with the contract because the deed's already in place with the owner. So you'd have to, you could structure the seller finance on a contract and not execute it yet, but you sign it, and then I go find a buyer, right? That I'm going to sell or finance to under completely different terms. I wouldn't do a double close in that case if I'm going to take possession of it. Um, I'm just when I say it publicly, I got to think through every freaking scenario because there's always a lot of scenarios that you could bring up. But in general, yes, you could do a double close with just about anything. I'm just figuring out why would you, and there might be one or two scenarios that I may be not thinking about. But
Yeah. Mike says, since the seller is still the owner of record, what if they get an IRS lien or some other lien in the future? Um, those types of liens, Mike, are not going to show up in the uh, quick property lookup or the step one property details. If this is a property you're going after, you know, you can always get your title company to do a quick basic title search on that, or liens that might pop up, something of that nature. I don't think you'll see those type of liens in REIPro. You do, we show all the mortgage data, the mortgage liens, the home equity first, second, up to maybe even, I think it's up to three liens. Generally, I see one and two, but I have seen up to three loans on a property.
yeah, and I'll just flip to the other side of the question. What happens if you're in the deal and that happens? Um, Number one, when the seller sells eventually, however they're selling at the closing, it's going to come out of the seller's proceeds. But the one thing that you have to be careful with is what happens if there's not enough proceeds at the closing table for the seller. The seller
Mm-hmm.
would have to bring a check to closing to pay it because maybe they owe the mortgage this much and now they have this IRS lien for this much that could be overvalued on the property. So you do have to just keep an eye on that. I've never had a seller actually go through that, but it could happen. It wouldn't happen in some scenarios if you protect yourself, but those are the things that I would keep an eye out for um, anytime you do a creative financing deal that the seller's holding mortgage or something like that.
All right, that wraps up our questions and the evening. I appreciate everybody joining. Now, keep in mind, next week, Chris, we're releasing the wholesale series in chunks. I'm not sure exactly how you're going to be spooling that out there, but
Yep.
that's going to be next week. We are going to skip the live Q&A session next week, and then sometime next week, look for the banner at the top. You're going to see deal analysis night. Everybody that's an REIPro subscriber can click on that link at that banner at the top. Then you can put in the details of the deal, and then we're going to try to answer all of them the next week after that. So look for that banner at the top.
We're not going to try. We are going to answer. Just a couple of things. If you do have a deal,
Well, if we get 60 of them,
try to give us as much information about the property, the situation of the owner, what they're going through. Um, Another thing is, if you do, you as soon as that banner goes, we'll let everybody know. Um, I'm I'm going to be marketing this to some of my meetup clubs to attend. Not they're not going to be able to submit the deal once we put in REI Pro. That's the only place that you can actually submit a deal. My recommendation is, as soon as that goes up and we tell you it's hey, you can now submit your deal, I would get the deal in as quickly as you can because there is a point where we just can't cover, like Bo said, 60 different deals. So we will have to take, just for time's sake, the first so many. And if we reach kind of that maximum, and I'm going to look at the deals that you submit in, I know kind of how long each one's going to take to analyze. Um, there could be a time where we may have to cut off. The second part to that, if you do submit a question, be sure to attend. Otherwise, we're not going to go through it. So make sure that you can attend that, make plans for it, because obviously if we can help you get a deal, sometimes it's a simple question you have, or you just don't understand the number side, and we can get that answered so we can get these deals done. And that's the fun part, is when you get paid, right? So
exactly.
anyways, you guys have a wonderful Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you guys again so much for being a part of REI Pro, being a part of this, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Talk soon.